In 1976, a broke, unknown actor named Sylvester Stallone sat across from a former NFL linebacker auditioning for the role of Apollo Creed. The actor read his lines. Then he looked at Stallone and said something no one auditioning for a part is supposed to say to the man who wrote the script and was about to star in it. "Where's the real actor? I can't read with the office guy." Stallone didn't get angry. He laughed. He turned to the producers and said, "He's so arrogant, I love this guy." That actor was Carl Weathers, and that one line of trash talk won him the role that would define his entire career. It's a great story, but it's also the smallest part of a much bigger one, because the man in that room, the office guy nobody recognized, had already survived a birth injury doctors thought might leave him disabled for life, a childhood that nearly broke him, and years of poverty so severe he once sold his own dog for grocery money. Tonight, we're telling the whole story, not just the insult, but the man who built an empire out of being underestimated. Sylvester Stallone was born on July 6, 1946, in a charity ward in New York's Hell's Kitchen, the kind of hospital reserved for families who couldn't afford anything better. His mother had gone into labor while riding a city bus, 9 months pregnant, with nowhere else to go. The delivery went wrong immediately. Doctors were forced to use 2 sets of forceps, and in the process, a nerve on the lower left side of his face was severed. The damage was permanent: a paralyzed lip, a slack jaw, a tongue that wouldn't move the way it should. It gave him the slurred, snarling voice the entire world would come to recognize decades later. At the time, it just made him a target. His childhood offered no shelter from that. His parents' marriage was volatile, and for the first years of his life, Sylvester was shuffled through boarding care while his mother and father sorted out a relationship that was falling apart around him. Kids at school called him Slant Mouth. He got into fights constantly, not because he was looking for trouble, but because trouble was the only response available to him. When his parents finally divorced in 1957, an 11-year-old Sylvester went to live with his father, a barber with a temper who, by every account from those who knew the family, believed in punishment more than patience. By his own brother's later description, corporal punishment wasn't a last resort in that house. It was policy. By 15, Sylvester had been expelled from enough schools that his mother, whom he'd rejoined in Philadelphia, enrolled him in a private school built specifically for what the era called troubled teenagers. It was there, oddly enough, that something shifted. Away from the constant judgment of mainstream classrooms, he started acting in school plays. For the first time, a room full of people looked at him and didn't see the slurred speech or the crooked smile. They saw a performer. College took him through the American College of Switzerland and eventually the University of Miami, but acting pulled harder than academics ever did. By the late 1960s, he was in New York, chasing a career that refused to start. The rejection was constant and specific. Casting directors didn't just pass on him, they told him why. His face was wrong. His voice was worse. One of the more painful ironies of his career came years later, when he was turned away from an extra role in The Godfather, a film about Italian-American families, because casting decided he didn't look Italian enough. He took what he could get: small parts in Clute and Woody Allen's Bananas, a supporting role in The Lords of Flatbush in 1974, alongside a young Henry Winkler, which he also helped write, an early sign that Stallone understood something about his own career that no one else did yet. If nobody was going to write him the right part, he'd have to write it himself. But before that recognition came a rock bottom most stars don't admit to on camera. At 23 years old, with barely over $100 to his name, Stallone took a role in a soft-core film called The Party at Kitty and Studs, credited under the name The Italian Stallion. It paid $200. He needed it too badly to say no. Years later, after Rocky made him famous, the film was re-released under a new title to cash in on his name, a piece of his past he couldn't outrun, even after he'd made it. He married his first wife, Sasha Chak, in 1974, and the two of them settled into a life defined by exactly how little money they had. At one point, broke enough that pride no longer mattered, Stallone sold his bull mastiff, Butkus, outside a liquor store for $50 because he could no longer afford to feed him. In March of 1975, Stallone watched a boxing match that would change the entire direction of his life. Muhammad Ali, the reigning heavyweight champion, was fighting a little-known challenger named Chuck Wepner, a man given almost no chance of winning. Wepner went the distance, knocking Ali down in the 9th round before ultimately losing by decision late in the 15th. Stallone couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the boxing itself, the idea underneath it. An underdog nobody believed in given one shot, refusing to fold. He sat down at his typewriter and wrote what would become Rocky in 3.5 days, barely sleeping, pouring every ounce of his own rejection and hunger into a boxer named Rocky Balboa. The script sold almost immediately. Producers offered Stallone a life-changing sum. Reports place it as high as $350,000 on one condition: he wouldn't star in it. They wanted a real leading man in the role, someone bankable. Stallone, who at that point couldn't reliably pay rent, said no. He held out. He negotiated instead for a fraction of that money and the lead role itself, betting his entire financial future on a part nobody but him believed he should play. His wife had to sell her jewelry without asking him first, just to help them survive the gap between selling the script and actually shooting the film. And that's the room Carl Weathers walked into for his audition. An actor and former NFL player, mostly known for bit parts, reading for the role of Apollo Creed opposite a writer-turned-star nobody in Hollywood had approved of. When Weathers threw out his line about not wanting to read with the office guy, he had no idea he was insulting the exact kind of person Stallone had spent his entire life being underestimated by. Stallone loved it instantly. It's exactly the arrogance Apollo Creed needed, and it's exactly the energy that made the two of them believable as rivals on screen. Rocky was released in 1976, made on a budget under $1 million, and it became the highest-grossing film of the year. Stallone became just the third person in history nominated for both Best Original Screenplay and Best Actor at the same Academy Awards. The film itself won Best Picture. Overnight, the man who'd been told his face and voice made him unemployable had become one of the most recognizable people on the planet. What followed was a decade and a half of dominance. 5 Rocky films, then First Blood in 1982, introducing a haunted Vietnam veteran named John Rambo, who became just as iconic. By the mid-1980s, Stallone was one of the highest-paid actors alive, commanding action franchises audiences couldn't get enough of. But success didn't erase the earlier damage. It just gave it a bigger stage. His personal life became a Hollywood story of its own. His marriage to Sasha Chak ended in 1985. He married Danish model and actress Brigitte Nielsen the same year in a relationship so intense and so brief, divorcing in 1987, that it became tabloid shorthand for Hollywood excess. He found lasting stability only with his third marriage to Jennifer Flavin in 1997, which has held for decades since. Here's the part of Stallone's story that has nothing to do with box office numbers. His eldest son, Sage Stallone, born to Sasha Chak and the boy who'd grown up watching his father become a legend, followed him briefly into acting, playing Rocky's son in Rocky V in 1990. Sage eventually moved away from acting and toward film preservation, co-founding a company dedicated to restoring cult and horror films that would otherwise have been lost. On July 13, 2012, Sage was found dead in his Los Angeles home. He was 36 years old. In the confusion of the first hours, early reports suggested a possible overdose. Stallone, devastated, publicly asked people to respect his son's memory and have compassion for Sage's mother rather than spread speculation. Weeks later, the coroner's office ruled the death was from natural causes. Coronary artery disease brought on by atherosclerosis, with only a minimal, non-contributing trace of medication in his system. Sage had a heart condition nobody had caught in time. Stallone has spoken since about how there is no pain like losing a child, a grief that no amount of box office success, awards or fame ever prepared him for, and one that sat quietly behind every project he took on in the years that followed. By the early 2000s, Stallone's career had cooled considerably. The action genre had moved past him, several films underperformed badly, and the man who once redefined an entire decade of Hollywood was being written off as a relic of the 1980s. He didn't disappear. In 2006, 3 decades after the original film, he returned to the character that started everything with Rocky Balboa. An aging former champion confronting mortality, aging and irrelevance almost as directly as Stallone himself was. It struck a chord. 2 years later, he brought Rambo back for a 4th film. In 2010, he launched The Expendables, an ensemble action franchise built explicitly around aging action stars refusing to be counted out, a concept that could have been written about Stallone's own career. Then, in 2015, came the moment that reframed his entire legacy. In Creed, Stallone returned to the Rocky universe one more time, not as the star, but as a mentor, passing the story to Michael B. Jordan, playing the son of his old friend and rival, Apollo Creed. For his performance, Stallone received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor nearly 40 years after his first nomination for the same character. He didn't win. But the industry that once refused to see him as a leading man had by then spent decades proving he'd been right about himself the entire time. In the years since, Stallone has kept working, including his first ever leading television role in Tulsa King, playing a mob boss rebuilding his life after decades in prison, a role, he's noted himself, that echoes his own career of exile and return more than he probably intended. Sylvester Stallone spent his entire life being told what he couldn't do. Doctors said his face would never move right. Teachers said he'd never amount to anything. Casting directors said his voice was wrong for the screen. Producers said he wasn't a leading man. And in one small room in 1976, an actor named Carl Weathers accidentally gave him the one thing nobody else had offered: respect, disguised as an insult. From a man who assumed Stallone was just the office guy standing between him and the real audition. He wasn't the office guy. He was the whole story. If Stallone's journey, the birth injury, the poverty, the son he lost, and the comeback nobody saw coming, moved you, let us know in the comments which part of his life surprised you the most. And if you want more deep dives like this one, subscribe, because there are more stories like his waiting to be told.